Welcome. My name is Pavel Tahkovuori, and while we're still arguing with our uncle whether men can eat vegan food, the world is moving on. And in this episode, we're talking about vegan pet food. Some people may see as maybe a scary subject, but probably a very needed one. Now, I myself don't know much about it. I don't have a dog nor a cat, just a few bunnies. But our guest is a veterinary professor with positions at 3 universities and PhD on vegan pet food. Andrew Knight, you're very welcome to be here.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
Could you explain, do we really need to talk about vegan pet food? Can't just dogs and cats eat whatever they want?
I think we absolutely do. We recognize that we need to live more sustainably. We are currently facing the biggest threat to life on Earth since the dinosaurs went extinct. This is being caused by our own activities, by the way that we live, by the way that we produce and consume fossil fuels, our transportation system, housing system, but absolutely our diets as well. Actually, diets are one of the biggest contributors of greenhouse gases each year. They contribute about a third of all greenhouse gases emissions each year. And the livestock sector, animal farming, is the biggest cause of deforestation on the planet and historically has been the greatest cause of greenhouse gases over time. We have always assumed that the need for more sustainable diets means human diets. And we've had this blind spot about animal diets, pet diets. But as a matter of fact, pets contribute a substantial proportion of the environmental impacts of the food sector. There was an initial study from the University of California that calculated that in the US, pets contributed about 25 to 30% of all of the environmental impacts of animal farming. So, huge numbers of these farmed animals are not being farmed to feed people. They're being farmed and killed to actually feed dogs and cats. So there's a real need to look at this issue. The vegan movement, the animal advocacy movement, has interestingly had a blind spot about pet diets. We have forgotten to consider animals. We've just focused on people, and that's not good for an animal advocacy movement. We need to be remembering that animals matter too, that the diets of our dogs and cats matter, and that they can have big consequences.
Can you explain to probably some listeners, this could be the first time they're talking about the emissions and the cost the food industry causes. You talked about deforestation. So how does it happen? How does food that we eat cause a lot of bad things for the planet?
There are vast amounts of land that are cleared to graze livestock animals on pasture, but that's not actually the biggest cause. The biggest cause is cutting down forests to grow feed crops to feed to livestock animals. This really has been the biggest cause of deforestation on the planet so far, and there was a really interesting study that was recently conducted by one of the climate scientists that calculated that this has been the biggest contributor of greenhouse gases over time, contributing more than 50% of all greenhouse gases in the atmosphere today actually come from this. It comes from deforestation, and most of that is occurring, the majority of that is occurring to actually grow feed crops to feed to livestock animals. Most of the crops that are grown are not grown to feed people. They're grown to feed livestock animals, particularly intensively farmed livestock animals. So this is a huge issue that we have pretty much overlooked, and we need to stop doing that. If you ask people to think about things like sustainable transport or more sustainable housing systems or energy systems, that's no problem. Everyone's happy to think about that. But if you ask them to do the quickest, easiest thing to help the planet, which is simply change their diets. This doesn't require people to purchase expensive electric cars or change their houses or develop alternative energy systems. This is something that everybody can do with their next meal in most places in the world. There's this strange resistance. Many people are remarkably unwilling to actually look at this and actually take the obvious step and actually just cut out animal products from their diets. So, we've had this blind spot about our own diets, And I think it's even worse with the diet of our dogs and cats. We haven't even considered that dogs and cats might possibly be able to be fed on modern vegan diets, which are now being formulated to be nutritionally sound. And we haven't looked at the environmental impacts and the impacts in terms of the numbers of animals being slaughtered each year to feed those dogs and cats. So we've had this blind spot, which is really not acceptable for a vegan movement or an animal advocacy movement. We shouldn't be just focusing on humans and being human-centric.
Yeah, of course, there's a dilemma of feeding animals to your beloved animal, and we'll talk about that soon enough. But I'm pretty sure that you've met a lot of resistance, probably from just people like me who have not much idea of what pets can eat or what is healthy, and only rely on information that has been available so far, or the quote-unquote common knowledge. So what's the common myths or perhaps arguments against pets eating plant-based?
Yeah, the obvious thing is that people assume that dogs and cats are carnivores and they need meat in order to be healthy and survive. That might have been true for ancestral dogs and cats in their natural environment a long time ago. Dogs have actually co-evolved with our ancestors for 20 to 40,000 years, and our ancestors ate meat. They killed game animals, but mostly what they did was they ate starchy root vegetables. That was the mainstay of their diets. They only ate meat when they could catch game animals, and that wasn't all of the time. So wolves, over time, started to collaborate with our ancestors in hunting parties. They would follow our ancestors around the landscape. They became omnivores, able to get some nutritional benefit from human food scraps, which were mostly starchy root vegetables, but also some meat. Dogs turned into omnivores. Cats remain carnivores. So they have co-evolved with humans for a shorter period, about 8 to 10,000 years, and their role was to guard our food stores from rodents. So they were encouraged to share our settlements with us and protect our food stores. This is maybe interesting, but none of it's relevant to modern domesticated dogs and cats, both of who consume body parts from animals they'd never naturally hunt, such as fish, cows, pigs, with many unnatural additives packaged up into things like dry kibble, fed at predictable times each day. This is a really very far removed from any natural feeding regime of an ancestral dog or cat. Of course, what dogs and cats need to actually be healthy is not any particular ingredient or ancestral feeding regime, but they need nutrients. They need a certain set of nutrients. And dogs and cats are likely to do well if a diet is nutritionally sound, if it's formulated by a modern pet food company, hopefully working with veterinary nutritional specialists, fully supplementing the diet with all necessary nutrients. They're likely to do well, regardless of whether that diet is vegan or meat-based. If a diet is deficient, if it's vegan or meat-based, then they may have problems over time. There have been many more meat-based pet foods found to be nutritionally deficient and unsound than there ever have vegan pet foods. So really what dogs and cats need is the right set of nutrients for that species. And what has changed in the last few years is that modern pet food companies have now been developing these, working with veterinarians. So in the United Kingdom, where I'm now based, there are 4 vegan pet food companies that have recently been developed by veterinarians. And they work with veterinary nutritional specialists to ensure that the diets are nutritionally sound for dogs and cats. And the second thing that's happened just in the last few years, there's been a whole body of scientific research which has been conducted and published by myself and my team, by a team at Guelph Vet School in Canada, which is one of the leading veterinary schools in Canada, and a few other researchers around the world. And we've now produced quite a big body of research exploring what are the health implications for dogs and cats when fed these diets, what are the environmental implications, and even do they like these diets? What is the behaviour at feeding time? Does it change when dogs and cats are fed vegan diets versus meat-based diets, and what does that tell us about how much they're enjoying their food? So we've now got all this new research, and we've got these new diets, and the world has changed. No longer are people making their own diets at home, which have often been nutritionally unsound, whether they're vegan or some other kind of a diet. now it's possible, and in fact quite easy to get, usually online, nutritionally sound vegan diets, and the study results about the implications for health of animals and the environmental impacts are actually really exciting with these diets.
Yeah, I think it would be interesting to hear more about the health implications. You mentioned that the dogs evolved from wolves and what they ate and how food is processed inside them in the stomach and intestines is different than thousands years before in wolves. Could you explain what the health studies are telling us right now?
Yes, there's been some incredibly exciting research in this area. There have now been 11 studies and one systematic review, which is where researchers explore the scientific literature for all relevant evidence. So 11 studies are showing, and one systematic review showing equivalent or superior health outcomes when dogs are fed vegan or vegetarian diets, usually vegan diets. There's been one study showing the opposite result. That's the oldest study from 1987, smaller study, only 8 dogs in least realistic study conditions. The dogs were on treadmills at high speeds for long periods of time. Okay. Not very realistic for normal dogs in households today. So there we have it. For dogs, we have 11 studies in favour, 1 study against, and a systematic review in favour. For cats, we have 3 studies in favour, and we have 0 credible studies with an opposite result. So there just aren't any studies showing that cats do badly on a vegan diet. So that's a pretty strong body of evidence. If you think about it, if there are meat-based diets, there are not 11 studies showing the benefits of those. When companies produce new diets and market them, they will sometimes cite scientific studies, and there tend to be only 1 or 2 or 0. That's normal. You never see 11. Likewise, when new drugs are produced for treatment of animals or people, again, you might see 1 or 2 studies, but you won't see 11. So this is a stronger body of evidence that exists to support the use of meat-based pet food or virtually any other veterinary therapy, actually. So the most exciting result out of all of those 11 studies, I think, was the study by Professor Dodd and colleagues from Guelph Veterinary School, who have shown that dogs fed vegan diets were living 1.5 years longer than dogs fed meat-based diets. And this difference was statistically significant, so almost certain to be a true biological difference and not a random variation in the sample. And 1.5 years is a really long time. We often think that 1 year of a dog life equates to around about 7 years of a human life. So if that's true, then that means these dogs are getting the equivalent of an extra decade, more than an extra decade of human life at the end of their lifespan. So that's a really substantial increase in time. And they're not just getting more time, they seem to be having a better quality of life, because across all of these 11 studies, there are 2 consistent clusters of healthcare benefits that keep on coming up again and again. One seems to relate to not consuming animal-sourced allergens in the diet. About 80% of dietary allergens for dogs are animal-sourced. So when you cut out the animal-based ingredients, you get a reduction in the problems these cause. So that's itchy skin, itchy ear canals, and gastrointestinal problems. These are all really common in dogs, and they impact quality of life. The second consistent cluster coming up.
Could you, before you move on, could you explain the allergens, what they are? Because perhaps some listeners are as unfamiliar or just getting a dog. What are these?
So allergens are usually proteins or other compounds within ingredients that cause allergic reactions and sensitivities. So they might be, in people, for example, hay fever is something that is on the rise, and it's an allergic response to pollen in the environment. For dogs, the responses are a bit different from human responses. Humans tend to get runny eyes, sneezing, whereas dogs will get itchy skin. They will have red and inflamed skin and paws and ears and ear canals, and these cause a lot of discomfort for dogs. So about 80% of the dietary allergens for dogs, the things that they react to, are from animal-based ingredients. So when we cut those out, we have a reduction in all of this itchy skin, ear canals, gastrointestinal problems, which cause a lot of problems for a lot of dogs. They're really common in veterinary practice, and they really can cause quite a bit of suffering for these dogs, and they sometimes are quite hard to treat unless you change the diet. So that's the first pattern of benefits. The second pattern of benefits seems to be that dogs that are overweight and obese, which is almost half of dogs today, slim down. And they also have improvements in mobility and a reduction in musculoskeletal disorders. So I think all of those are related. These benefits occur consistently. So we have dogs that are not only living the equivalent of more than a decade of life if they were human beings. That's a lot of extra time. But they also seem to be happier dogs. They seem to have less problems with itchy skin, ear canals, and better mobility, less musculoskeletal disorders. So that's really exciting, I think, for dog guardians.
That's very interesting. And I think it's interesting to hear more about the studies, or how they were done, because this subject has a lot of people questioning, like, is this even possible? And perhaps who funded these studies? The conversation that is always, of course, needed. And I'm interested in hearing, are these Guardian questionnaires, when Guardian questionnaires, I'll explain quickly to listeners, is when the questionnaires are sent to people who own the dog, and then they report on, for example, how healthy, what did the vet say, etc. Am I correct in this one?
That's right, yes.
Yeah. So are these studies Guardian related, or what do we know?
Across the 11 studies in dogs and 3 in cats, we've got quite a different range of study designs. There are indeed Guardian studies. For example, we have conducted a study of the health outcomes in more than 2,500 dogs, and that was a Guardian survey. And the benefit of these is that you can reach hundreds and thousands of people relatively quickly and easily, and get a lot of data from them with a very low budget. So that's great. You can get very high numbers of animals in different groups, and you can run statistical tests and work out differences and get statistical significance in your results because you've got large numbers. The disadvantage would be if the opinions of people are not reliable. So there are ways that you can try to minimise any conscious or unconscious bias effects that people might have in their answers by careful wording of the questions that you ask and by the way that you order the items in your survey. So we did all of that. We were further reassured by a follow-up study from Nottingham University that looked at our results and found that the diets that people were feeding had no impact upon their opinion of animal health. So this made it more likely that if they were reporting greater medication use or greater numbers of vet visits in the meat-based group, then these were true differences and not affected by their opinions. So we've done all of that, but it's possible that there is still some residual bias, some conscious or unconscious bias effects, but there's no reason to think these would be greater in any one group than any other. Some people worry that vegans might be biased. It's also true that people, are sort of resistant to feeding vegan diets are often quite biased against vegan diets, and people that want to feed raw meat are often very passionate about raw meat. So there's potential bias in all groups, but we think the effects are very small and no greater in one group than any other. However, across the other studies in this group, there are also studies that involve veterinary clinical examinations. There are blood tests of nutrient levels. There are biomarkers of organ health. There are X-ray results. Even our studies, although we asked for the opinions of people, we also found out what were the health assessments of their veterinarians as well. So you've got a range of different data. The studies that involve blood work, X-rays, veterinary clinical data are probably more accurate, but they have many fewer animals because they're much more expensive to do. Yeah. So the numbers of animals might be 30 or 50, so you don't get large numbers and you can't run tests to find out differences between groups with statistical validity in the same way that you can when you have very large numbers. What would be ideal would be if we had the clinical data with thousands of animals, but that would cost well over 100,000 euros, and no one has yet offered that kind of money. If any of your listeners want to offer that, they should reach out to me, and I have, we can make that happen at veterinary schools around the world. However, I would reiterate that we do have these 11 studies in dogs and 3 in cats using all this array of different data that is a collected body of evidence which is not perfect. It never is in any research field, but it is stronger than the evidence that exists to support meat-based diets or virtually any kind of veterinary therapy, probably human therapy as well that's ever been invented. It's a really strong body of evidence.
Yeah, that's incredibly interesting. I think my question would be that the same as in humans, that vegans who choose a vegan diet, they almost always are more interested in the health of the diet, and they have I have to get a B12. What else do I need? So you kind of get back to the beginning of how do I eat, and they probably usually eat more healthy. And it's interesting in dogs because there's a second kind of group that want to eat, they want to give their dogs raw meat. That's another health ideology movement in that field. Am I correct?
There are people who are very passionate about feeding raw meat, and they think that it will be better for their dogs.
So that's my question would be, because some could say that the dogs are healthier on a vegan diet because their guardian is more aware of the health effects. But if it is so, can we see the same thing happening on the raw meat diet?
Yes, absolutely. People who feed those diets feed them because they think that they are natural diets, even though, as I've explained, ancestral dogs had a really mixed diet that included a lot of starchy root vegetables from scraps from our human ancestors. But nevertheless, people wrongly think that these are natural diets and their dogs will be healthier on them. These people are usually ignorant of the scientific evidence in this field. I had a veterinarian debating with me in the United Kingdom who published a letter in a veterinary journal daring me to do a health study comparing the effects of raw meat diets and vegan diets. However, he didn't know about any of the evidence in this field. I replied that, well, we actually did that study and we published it last year, and it showed superior health outcomes for vegans in virtually every respect. So the studies have been done. That is what they show. They also show a couple of interesting things. One is that people feeding raw meat diets are less likely to visit veterinarians and less likely to comply with veterinary healthcare advice. I think that's because virtually all veterinarians are aware that raw meat diets are associated with two groups of hazards. One is nutritional deficiencies and imbalances. They'll be high in protein, but they may not have any minerals, and they may not have enough vitamins either. Yeah. The second hazard is pathogens, bacteria, worms, microorganisms of various kinds that can infest both dogs and the people in those households. So most veterinarians are aware of these studies, and they advise against feeding raw meat diets, and they disapprove of raw meat diets. And I think people feeding raw meat diets are aware of this, and they don't want to face the disapproval of their veterinarians, and they'll become less likely to visit veterinary clinics and learn about other veterinary healthcare concerns and to follow veterinary healthcare advice. So they're compounding their own ignorance, unfortunately.
This sounds a lot like carnivore movement in humans.
Yeah, it does sound a lot like the carnivore movement, doesn't it? There's people believing in sort of myths, stories, ignorant of the actual scientific evidence and the realities of what humans need to be healthy.
So what do dogs eat on a vegan diet? Could you go through specifics?
Sure. So look, dogs consuming commercial meat-based diets, 90% of those are actually dry kibble. Commercial meat-based diet is nearly 50% plant material, about just over 50% animal-based ingredients, lots of additives. They might be nutritional supplements, preservatives, colorants, flavorants added into the diets. Dogs consuming vegan diets, if they're plant-based vegan diets, then it'll be all of the same things without the animal-based component and more of the plant-based component. So that's the difference. If the diets are being well manufactured by good companies working with nutritional specialists, then diets in both groups will be formulated to be nutritionally supplemented to include all the necessary nutrients. There's no particular requirement for dogs to consume meat. There is a requirement for them to have specific nutrients included in their diet. And if the companies are doing their job properly and working with veterinary nutritional specialists, then they will be designed to include all the necessary nutrients. And it doesn't matter whether it's vegan or not.
What are some of the nutrients that some companies perhaps do not include in the pet food? What are most common ones?
I mean, there are macronutrients and micronutrients. So pet foods need to have the right overall level of protein. There's also carbohydrates and fats. Within the proteins, there are a lot of amino acids. Some of those are required in the diets of dogs and cats and also humans, actually. People often worry about the amino acid taurine. Cats require that in their diet. Dogs don't. They can actually make it themselves from other amino acids, but cats require it in the diet. Without taurine, there can be heart disorders, birth defects, visual disorders, and eventually serious consequences for cats especially. It was found in the 1960s that cats consuming meat-based pet food were suffering taurine deficiency, and people wondered how could this be, because taurine is included in meat. And studies were done, and it was discovered that the high temperatures and pressures involved in the processing of pet food were actually damaging the naturally occurring taurine. Some of these nutrients are quite fragile and will be degraded or destroyed by the high temperatures and pressures in pet food processing. So after the processing is finished, you have to supplement them with synthetic nutrients. So synthetic taurine was added back into the meat-based cat food, and the cats were fine again after that. So the same synthetic nutrients are added into vegan diets as well for the same reason. So both meat-based and vegan diets do need to be supplemented to make sure that the right balance of nutrients are included in them. And if they are, you should expect the health of those animals to be fine. If you remove dietary hazards, it gets even better. And the most common dietary hazard is probably animal-based ingredients causing allergic responses in dogs and cats, and things like itchy skin and ear canals. So if you remove those, the health of the dogs and cats improves in those kind of ways.
Okay, so just to be clear, one of the main counter-arguments against plant-based cat food is that, one, the cat needs taurine, but the taurine in cat food is usually already synthetic, non-animal based?
That's correct, because the natural taurine gets heavily degraded. It's an amino acid. Under adverse conditions, amino acids, they're complex molecules, they can sort of unravel, they can start to unfold, and then they lose their biological activity. They don't work anymore. And that can be caused by the high temperatures and pressures of processing of modern pet food. There are very high temperatures and pressures involved in producing dry kibble, for example, which is 90% of all meat-based pet food.
Is dry kibble like the pellets?
That's right, okay. The pellets, yeah. So that's 90% of all meat-based pet food is these pellets.
Yeah.
And these processing methods damage fragile nutrients like taurine and like many others as well. So they do have to be added back in after processing from a synthetic source.
Okay, that's fascinating. Because now when you look at the pet food, you see it quite differently. Does it say synthetic taurine or just taurine? Do you
No,
have...
because it makes no difference
to
the nutrient. Yeah. Nutrient doesn't care where it came from. It's what's important is the structure of the molecule, not the source of it.
Yeah. Okay. And if they wrote vegan taurine, some would be like, "Oh, I can't buy this one."
Well, it's all vegan taurine. The synthetic taurine added to meat-based pet food doesn't come from animals, so it's vegan taurine.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying. That if the companies wrote on the back of the package that it's vegan taurine, people would go probably scared and then think like...
because people who insist on feeding meat-based diets are often biased against vegan diets, and that bias would lead them to have a negative reaction. Yes.
And I'm going to be honest. I have been biased too, and I've been quite skeptical. What's the word? Skeptical, sorry, yeah, about this before I heard the taurine argument, because that's what I've been learning like over and over again, that cats can't do it because of the taurine. And one question is can every cat and dog be vegan?
Absolutely. If we provide all the nutrients that dogs, cats, humans, or any species requires in the diet, you should expect good health outcomes. There's just no scientific reason why you wouldn't expect that. The gold standard test is health studies showing the outcomes for thousands of animals. We have those now. Myself and my team have done those studies, and there are others that have done them as well. For example, the team in Canada. We're consistently finding that the health outcomes are at least as good in many respects. There's no statistically significant difference, but in a few respects there seem to be improvements when animals are fed vegan diets. There are no areas in which the health of these animals appears to be worse, actually, than animals fed meat-based diets.
Are there some perhaps allergies to some ingredients, or maybe some pets can't handle the food so well, especially in Finland, there's not much of plant-based food options. So is that a possibility?
People acquiring these diets nowadays are mostly ordering them online. Some of these diets are becoming quite widely available within Europe, which is great. There are also many in the United Kingdom. Some other regions of the world as well. I appreciate it's not always easy in every corner of the world to get these, but certainly much easier than it used to be. I have a website, sustainablepetfood.info, where I list suppliers. I'm one very busy researcher, so I haven't had time to keep that up to date, but it does indicate the range of suppliers around the world, and that's a non-profit service. I don't receive any funding from any of the companies, but there's a long list of suppliers available for these products.
Okay. Do you have any other tips where one could learn about what a dog and a cat on a plant-based diet would need to eat?
Yes, I mean, I have summary articles on my website, sustainablepetfood.info, but the key things, I think, are to check the packaging, make sure that it doesn't just say this is only intended as a treat or a snack. Make sure it says this is a nutritionally complete diet for dogs or for cats. Get it from a good company, a reputable pet food company that hopefully has been working with veterinary nutritional specialists or other nutritional specialists to make sure that all of the necessary nutrients are included. And they should be able to provide some basic information about how they can ensure nutritional soundness. So it might be that they've designed the diet to meet all the nutritional requirements of the European authorities. It might be that they have conducted a feeding trial where they have dogs or cats consuming the diet as their sole nutrient intake for 6 months and assessing the animals afterwards. But they should be able to provide some kind of reassuring information. If they don't have any and they won't answer questions, that should be a warning sign. You should consider a different company.
Yeah, because I can only talk about Finnish vitamin industry, or what we can get even in drugstores. What's the other name for drugstore? Because we have
pharmacies.
Yeah, pharmacies, and in Finnish apteekki, they sell multivitamins that say for vegans, but the multivitamins are not that suitable for vegans, and they have some nutrients that fight together and don't get
absorbed.
Yeah, that well. So there's quite many companies that do that. That's why I'm interested in how it's like in the pet food. Are they?
Okay. I don't advise that people try to find nutrients and add those themselves. It is possible if you're in some part of the world, for example, where you can't find a commercial vegan diet. You might want to follow a recipe, add nutritional supplements. You can buy those online as well and try and make your own. Dogs have got a long history of doing quite well on a mixed variety of human food scraps, so they seem to have higher tolerance. Cats are a bit more specialised as in their natural environments, needing to eat meat. As I say, that's only their natural ancestral environments. But there have been several studies looking at the results of these homemade diets and vegan or other diets, and pretty uniformly they've been found to be nutritionally unsound. So it seems very difficult to actually get this right. So I don't recommend that people try this themselves unless they're expert nutritionists. I would suggest instead let the companies do the work for you. They're the ones that should be going to veterinary nutritional specialists and doing all that hard work of making sure the correct nutrients are included. So just basically check the packaging, make sure it says it's nutritionally complete, it's from a good company, that can provide some information about what they've done to make sure the diet is nutritionally sound. They might say they're working with veterinary nutritional specialists or have manufactured the diet to meet all the nutritional requirements of the European authorities. There should be some kind of information. I'm not a veterinary nutritionist. I'm most interested in what the outcomes are.
Oh, yeah.
Because I think that's the most important thing, not what we put into the animal, but what is the end result. And that's what the health studies show us. And we now have this really big body of evidence showing that providing that the diets are nutritionally sound, you should expect to have health outcomes which are as good in many respects and actually better in a few important respects than for animals fed meat-based pet foods. That's really the gold standard test. It's what is the end result in the animal. And all the studies, almost all the studies are showing good or superior results. So I think that's the most important thing.
You have a high interest in both the environmental and the health side of this subject. So it's interesting to hear, what's your background? How did you get into this field?
I've been working in small animal veterinary practice for nearly a decade, mostly in the United Kingdom, around London. And I'd been interested in the idea of vegan diets for dogs and cats because it was clear that there were major environmental benefits and some health benefits of these diets for people. But what about dogs and cats? It was certainly a common urban myth that dogs and cats couldn't be healthy on vegan diets. They would suffer dire health consequences. So I went looking for the scientific evidence about this, and I wasn't able to find any studies showing that dogs and cats had worse health outcomes when fed vegan diets. I sort of accidentally found 11 studies showing adverse health consequences when they maintained on meat-based diets for long periods of time, but I didn't find any of the studies to support the common myth that dogs and cats would become sick and die on vegan diets. So that was interesting, but I didn't get time to look into that properly until the year 2000. By then I was working in a university, running a research centre, and we had 3 animal welfare degrees. I was very busy with lots of marking and teaching and administration, and I didn't have time to research anything well until I finally got a research grant in 2000 that enabled me to hire some help to do some of my teaching and administration and things like that, which gave me time. And finally I had time to research this issue properly. So that's when I started focusing on this in depth, and I ended up doing a bunch of studies in this area and completing a PhD on vegan pet food. And that's when I started discovering these really exciting results showing these game-changingly large environmental benefits and some significant health benefits as well for dogs and cats with vegan diets, providing, of course, the diets are well manufactured to be nutritionally sound.
Perhaps some listeners are interested in trying out or transitioning their pet food to vegan or plant-based, however we want to name it. What would be the next steps? Should the transition be like first change the 20% to plant-based or 50% and etc.? And what are the next steps on following? Because perhaps many are quite stressed. Change is quite often stressful, especially if it's about your family member, a dog, a cat. Does one need to check on the pet, for example, in the vet in the upcoming months or year? What do you recommend?
Sure. I don't think people need to be concerned about health, providing that it's a diet from a good company that says that it's nutritionally complete. Dogs and cats vary a lot in their personalities and their temperaments and their preferences. Some dogs, for example, seem very keen to eat anything that's offered and don't ask questions until afterwards. Some old dogs or cats have been eating a specific diet with commercial flavourants for years on end and are almost addicted to a certain diet choice and can be very difficult to transition onto any new diet. Regardless of which kind of animal you have, I would suggest try to do a transition gradually over a couple of weeks. And even if this is really changing from one meat-based diet to another, if you want to minimize your chance of adverse gastrointestinal reactions or other reactions, then a gradual transition allows time for the digestive enzymes to change and for the bacteria inside the intestines to change as well, minimizing any chance of adverse reactions. So it's a matter of mixing in a little bit of the new food with the old food and gradually changing it over time. Don't act by your behaviour like anything strange is going on. Show enthusiasm for the diet. It can be good for your dog to think that if they don't eat it, maybe you will. And with these vegan diets, you could potentially do that as well. Quite famously, some of the CEOs of the companies have eaten their own product on television to demonstrate that actually there's nothing harmful in these diets. They don't include animal byproducts, and they're not a problem for vegans. Anyway, so you should try gradually changing the diet over a couple of weeks. Act by your behaviour like nothing unusual is happening. You can try certain additives. You could try vegetable oil, nori flakes, spirulina, nutritional yeast. These are all on my website, sustainablepetfood.info, in the summary article. You can try gently warming the food, fresh food only. Warming helps to bring odours out, and the sense of smell is really important for dogs and cats, much more than for us. So try all these things and don't feel too bad about yourself if your very old fussy dog or cat actually runs the household and the kitchen instead of you, and you are only able to get halfway there after 6 months. Because even halfway, if you think about it, is probably going to get you half of the health benefits and half of the environmental benefits. Yeah. And that's not nothing. This is still really substantial. It's really helpful. So this isn't about vegan purity. This is about doing the most good. And if you can achieve any transition in the right direction, any substantial transition, you're going to get substantial benefits, even if you can't quite make it 100%.
Yeah, and I'm interested, you have a few packages in front of you. Could you go over them, what they are?
Yeah.
And there's a small little bottle.
I do. So we have had a lot of traditional plant-based vegan pet foods in the last few years, but there's been some really exciting developments this year. We've had the world's first cultivated meat-based pet foods. So this one was released in the United Kingdom by a company called Meatly with the pack in February. And this one comes from Benny Meats in Prague, and this is being released around about now as we're filming this, actually, so it's just becoming available. It's very exciting. So these are from animal cells grown in laboratories. So this produces meat, but without pesticides, hormones, antibiotics, and other impurities. So it's not vegan. This is animal-based, but from petri dishes, not from living animals. And we also have the world's first microbial protein-based pet foods. So here we have protein, which comes directly from harmless microorganisms grown in giant fermentation cylinders in China, where you feed in organic waste material. So this is offcuts from cane sugar production. It's in a cane sugar growing region with a small amount of water, air, and the microorganism that produces protein powder directly, which is amazing. Very little land, water, and just organic waste. So this could be the most efficient way to produce food. It might be the future of food. It's now been turned into the protein source in this new dog food, which has been released in Germany in February of this year as well. It is now also available in the United Kingdom and across Europe. It's called Microbell. It comes from Vet. So that's very exciting. So there's some really exciting new developments going on in this space. But the traditional plant-based vegan pet foods are relatively easy to get and widely available from online purchases.
Yeah, and in Finland there's up-and-coming Pekilo company, which is creating also, I think they're creating feed for animal-based production, which is not something we're going to talk about. But they're also creating, I think, dog food, and I think it's mushroom or fungus-based microbial build. Also, there's a lot of new companies. I think in 5 years we'll learn so much more. If someone would choose between cultivated meat, cell-based meat, and perhaps I don't know what dog food contains if it's 100% vegan. Which option does one choose? Is it up to dog then to choose its favorite?
You could say it's up to the dog. If they're both formulated to be nutritionally sound, it's not likely to make any difference to the health of their dogs. They should both be fine. We have done huge studies to look at whether dogs prefer plant-based vegan diets to meat-based, and found no significant difference between the two when you look at averages of thousands of animals. We haven't yet done studies comparing preferences on consuming cultivated meat or microbial protein-based pet foods. The companies, of course, have done their own initial feeding trials and produced products that the dogs seem to enjoy. And of course, if they weren't doing that properly, they'd rapidly go out of business. If you produce a product that dogs won't eat, then you're not going to stay in business for very long. So there's no reason to think that the dogs are not going to love these products. And indeed, when I was interviewed on Dutch television earlier this year, we put down bowls of all three. We had cultivated meat, we had microbial protein, and we had plant-based vegan pet foods. And I didn't know what was going to happen, and it was quite stressful for me because the TV cameras were rolling. This was going out to up to 500,000 Dutch people on mainstream TV, and if the dogs refused to eat these products, it wasn't going to look good for the whole sector, and the companies would not have liked me. So I had a bit of sweat rolling down the brow when this was going on. But the dogs actually came in like vacuum cleaners and wolfed it all up. And there was a particular dog called Zelda, who was a brown dog. I'm originally from Australia, and we know about great white sharks. When a great white shark is about to potentially attack, it will sometimes come and just bump you from the side to sort of investigate, what are you? Could you possibly be edible? Anyway, so I was looking at these bowls and I felt this bump on the side of me, and then this mass rushed by me, this shaggy brown mass, and it was this dog called Zelda. And Zelda just knocked the other dogs out of the way and centered herself above a bowl and sort of vacuumed up the contents of that one, and that one. They were all gone. So all of the dogs, especially Zelda, seemed to love all of these foods. So I certainly couldn't detect any difference. So I don't know what would happen if you used thousands of dogs, but that's what I've seen with a small number.
Okay, that's interesting. So if we're going to have a bright future, and I hope we will, and more plant-based option will be available, and more people are going to learn the science behind it and the need behind it, what would be the environmental outcome of this?
I think that's the most exciting area of this whole field. It's what are the environmental benefits, and the most important study that I've done is not a health study. It was the environmental study that I published in 2023. And I calculated what would happen if the world's dogs and cats and people all transitioned onto nutritionally sound vegan diets. And I found out that if all the world's companion dogs, so not the dogs in animal shelters, working dogs, community-owned dogs, just the pet dogs, if they were to all transition, there'd be massive environmental benefits. We'd free up 1.5 times the amount of greenhouse gases produced by the United Kingdom would no longer be produced. So that's how many greenhouse gases would be saved. We would free up enough food energy to feed about 450 million additional people, which is the population of Europe. So there are staggering environmental benefits. There'd be vast savings of land and fresh water as well. So I think these are the most exciting environmental benefits. There'd also be huge savings of food animal lives. Back in 2018, there were 78 billion land animals killed in the food system each year, which is about 10 for every person on the earth. It's now more than 92 billion, so it's going up. In 2018, almost 10% of these animals around the world being killed were not being killed to feed people, but to feed dogs and cats, even after accounting for animal byproducts in pet food. So that equated to 6 billion land animals being killed every year to feed dogs, and about 1 billion killed to feed cats. So that's how many lives you could save for farmed land animals if these diets were universally adopted. So there is huge potential to save lives and to produce major environmental benefits. And there are even some potential health benefits for these dogs and cats as well. So there's just no good reason not to be doing this, and there are some really strong reasons to be considering this.
Do you find it hard as a professor to talk about the moral issues of what the dogs and cats and all the pets are eating? Because I find it, I hear it often that in the scientific field, the morality of our food industry is not something we are usually talking about, but it's the emission, it's the how much land we use, how much water we use, and count, like something you can count. Of course, you can count the animals, like you said, over 90 billion, right?
Well, over 90 billion land animals are killed in the food system each year, and 1 to 3 trillion fish and marine animals as well.
Yeah, so that's something you can count, but I think the moral issue is not usually talked about. How do you perceive it? Is it easy for you to talk about around the world with different colleagues in the scientific field?
I think it is easy if we put it into more scientific terms, because that's how we all think and are trained. So, for example, with all these farmed land animals, they're saying more than 90 billion are killed worldwide each year. That's more than 10 for every person on the earth. 90% of these animals are being farmed in intensive farming systems where they're crowded together in very small spaces with very little environmental enrichment in conditions that are chronically stressful to them. And then virtually all of these animals are then killed at a very premature stage of life. They don't get to live out their natural lifespans. That's certainly a moral issue by any standards, any standards that are not purely human-centric. People sometimes say, well, death is not an animal welfare concern. And therefore, if an animal is killed humanely, which, by the way, is not always true in modern slaughterhouses, but if it was killed humanely, there would be no moral issue here. However, modern thinking about animal welfare recognises that a good animal welfare is not just the avoidance of negative states, it also includes animals being able to have positive states. When you kill an animal, you permanently prevent the achievement of any future positive states. So it's actually a profound animal welfare problem. It's not zero problem. It's actually a major animal welfare problem, and it's a major moral crime. If by any definition of a moral crime, it's a major moral crime to deprive a sentient animal or a person of their life when they have the potential for years of life ahead of them, being able to enjoy the fruits of a life. The only time when it might be justified to kill from an ethical perspective would be true euthanasia, when there is an animal, for example, that is suffering from a severe and intractable medical problem, that it's substantially suffering, and the hope for recovery is very low. In that case, yes, there is an ethical argument for humanely killing that animal, and in this case it's true euthanasia. Euthanasia is a term that's often hijacked to attempt to legitimise forms of killing that are not genuinely in the animal's best interests. So this is really whitewashing of killing that is not actually ethical. So yes, there are major ethical implications involved in the raising and killing of 78 billion sentient land animals each year, and 1 to 3 trillion fish and marine animals. It's hard to think of any bigger ethical concern than this.
I found that so well put, the way you put the death of an animal as a welfare issue. And I think the next counter-argument usually is, to us at least, it's usually some kind of a Hail Mary argument, like it's the last thing I got and I throw it your way. It's that, well, without having a 90 billion land animal food industry, those 90 billion animals would have never existed. And thus, by creating existence, we can allow ourselves to do whatever we're doing to those animals. Have you heard of such an argument?
Yes, I have. It's amazing the desperate levels that people will go to try to construct arguments to justify something that they want to continue doing. And that's certainly the case for people that want to continue to consume animal products or feed them to their dogs and cats. In the defiance of all of the evidence and sound reasoning in a field, they will still continue to try to construct arguments like this. I mean, the idea that if it wasn't for us, these animals wouldn't exist. And because we breed them and produce them in large numbers, that gives us the right to do whatever we want to them, is obviously deeply flawed. I suppose it's akin to human parents saying that if it wasn't for us, our children wouldn't exist, therefore we own them. We can do anything to them that we want. There are various cases of child neglect and abuse, which are regularly in the courts and in the media. Under this reasoning, all of those parents would be acquitted, that none of them would be found to be guilty of anything, and all of that would be acceptable. Of course, that's not true. We recognise that once sentient beings are brought into the world, then they have a moral status and interests independently of our own interests that we might have had in creating them. They have their own moral status and their own interests. And, we have choices in life. If we want to be ethical agents and actors on the planet, then we don't have freedom to do anything we want. We have obligations to others to try to minimise the harm that we cause and maximise the good that we do on the planet and to others. So we have to recognise that sentient creatures have their own interests, and there are sound reasons for according them a moral status. And if we want to be ethical agents, then we need to respect their interests and to uphold their welfare.
Yeah, and I think there's a big flaw in the argument I mentioned because it sees just life as itself as worth living, except that we know that life in factory farming is usually not worth anything because it's in many conditions, just for many animals, just suffering, constant stress, not able to do the things that your body wants to do, your mind wants to have. And then the death is, as you said, it's not a euthanasia as many hope it would be, and it's far from it. And in Finland, quite many people do not know that both the pigs and the chickens are gassed. And that's something we usually never see for a good reason. Perhaps another counter-argument would be that, well, my beloved pet dog or dogs are family and the other animals are farmed animals.
Yes.
So that's a big difference for morality, and one has a family, other one is meant for food. Do you perceive it that way?
Yes, this is a position where the moral status of an animal depends upon its relationship to us. And this would be a bit like saying, well, I'm going to uphold the human rights of my immediate family and friends, but ignore the human rights of people that I don't know. That is a deeply flawed position. And likewise, it would be deeply flawed to say that, well, one sentient animal that has an equivalent capacity to suffer and an equivalent set of interests should be loved and looked after, but another should be exploited and killed. That is the definition of bias. It's interesting that people often like to argue that animal advocates are biased. Well, the kind of thinking that I've just described is the embodiment of bias. It's hard to think of any more biased position than that one. It's completely flawed from a scientific perspective and from a logical perspective as well. So I have no respect for that position.
There's a big dilemma in pet shops because my partner has two bunnies, and I've had in my home not a sanctuary bunny, but one is looking for a home, and I've had a lot of times seen both bunny food, so hay being sold, and then 5 meters from it, rabbits being sold for dogs, and that's quite an interesting sight to see. And it's quite often that I see online even rabbit or bunny owners being quite weirded out by the breed being sold for food, and they still see other animals being okay to be sold for food. So there's a certain ladder or steps when you include more and more animals into not food category and the food category. And I see that as due to you yourself eating them animals. You travel around the world and see different food cultures. Do you see big differences in how people see animals in other countries around the world as food versus non-food?
Yes, I mean, rabbits are a species that are concurrently treated as pets and as a food source and as a laboratory test subject. They have this diversity of roles within society depending upon how people wish to treat them. But of course, they're all the same rabbits. They all have the same set of biological needs and interests and the same moral status. So this does not reflect inconsistency in the rabbits. It reflects inconsistency in us, in our reasoning, in our treatment of these animals. Around the world, there are certainly differences. There are regions of the world that have a more developed understanding of the interests of animals, animal sentience, positive and negative emotional states, animal welfare as a legitimate social concern, and the need to respect animals morally. And there are countries where this is much less developed, and it's because the animal advocacy movement has been in existence for a much shorter period of time and is much smaller. So the leading countries are probably the more progressive nations, being European nations, particularly Western and Northern Europe, along with Canada, Australasia, or Australia, New Zealand. The United States is well known, unfortunately, to be behind in terms of its treatment of animals, its animal welfare legislation compared to the other nations. And some other regions of the world now have animal protection movements, but they are in their relative infancy. And there are many Asian countries in this group. Some of those countries have a long tradition of vegetarianism for people, which is fantastic. And it's why they've had relatively good public health outcomes in many respects as well. This is now changing also in some of these countries as their disposable incomes increase, as the countries develop, and they are now consuming more expensive animal produce at a much higher level. So there are these changes going on around the world. With respect to pets, pet ownership is increasing globally. In Asia, it's expected to go up about 30% in the next 10 years to 300 million dogs and cats, which will then be the biggest region of the world for dogs and cats. So it's a really important region. In Europe, it's going up about 11%. And we, of course, have many millions of dogs and cats in Europe as well. So it's also a very important region.
I find that subject extremely interesting and at the same time like a touchy subject because it can get even racist because, for example, people in Finland could say that, oh, those South Koreans, they eat dog until 2027, until it's not legal. But at the same time, like, what's the difference between eating a dog and a cow and a cat for the animal? So we don't see the mirror in that argument over there. And at the same time, I see farmers being angry at animal rights advocates, saying that, well, in Finland, it's much better than in, for example, China or Russia or US. So why are you complaining to me because I'm doing like so much better? And I see the point too. I see why that would anger myself if I would be in their position, because if I would look at a Russian slaughterhouse, at a Russian farm, or even a Spanish rabbit farm, I would be more furious than I would look at a basic Finnish farm. Do you get these kind of dilemmas in your mind when you talk to people from different sides of the perspective of animal rights?
I mean, I understand and agree with all of that. There are those differences. There are cultural differences as well. There are some traditional practices involving using and harming animals, which have been culturally normal in some parts of the world historically. I'm an animal welfare scientist, so I'm interested in what are the animals experiencing, what is the scientific evidence relating to issues like animal sentience and the capacity of animals to experience pain, fear and stress and positive emotions as well, and what the animal's needs are. And so, from that perspective, it's clear that animals are being harmed in virtually all cultures in different ways. The people in wealthy westernizations might well point to some cultures and say, well, look at this terrible practice going on over there. But actually, the biggest harms are usually intensive farming systems, which probably even more developed in wealthy nations than in developing nations. The biggest harms involve these systems, which confine many billions of animals really around the world in conditions which, by any reasonable definition, are cruel. The animals are very crowded in conditions of minimal environmental enrichment. It's chronically stressful to them, and this is all done for reason of consumer preference, not because of any genuine dietary or nutritional need for people. So I don't think people that are supporting such widespread and industrialized animal cruelty for reasons of personal preference are in any good position to be attempting to morally criticize others, to be honest.
So, Andrew, I know you didn't visit Finland just for this podcast, even though we would be humbled. So what's going on? Why are you in Finland right now?
There's actually a huge veterinary conference. It's the annual conference of the European Specialty College for veterinary specialists in animal welfare and animal behaviour. So we've got well over 200, more than 250 veterinarians from across Europe and around the world in Helsinki at the moment at this very large annual conference. And I'll be talking to them this afternoon about our study exploring the health of dogs fed vegan diets. So this is exciting to be able to talk to hundreds of vets and educate them about the good health outcomes that you can achieve using vegan diets in dogs. And I also was very fortunate to have Viral Vegans organise for me to give a 1 hour talk on vegan pet food last night here in Helsinki as well. And for anyone that missed that and is interested, I do have recordings of previous presentations on my YouTube channel. And Viral Vegans are trying to make their slides of my presentation available as well. But it's wonderful to be here in Helsinki. I'm enjoying it. It seems to be a beautiful city and very green, lots of forest. And I'm very busy with research projects and the conference, but I'm hoping to get a little time to see the city tomorrow afternoon as well. Looking forward to that.
Hope you have a fantastic end of the week, and thank you, Andrew. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.